With this, we move on to the next session of today's scientific fiesta. And to speak on this particular session, unmasking the subclinical hypothyroidism need of the hour, I would like to invite speaker Dr. Silima Tarenia ma'am. She is a promising endocrinologist and she was attached to Medica Super Speciality Hospital along with Manipal Hospital, Thakuria, currently working in Ruby General Hospital, having all over of 13 years of experience. To chair this particular session, I would like to invite Dr. Dasharothi Sarkar, Senior Consultant Endocrinologist at Calcutta Medical College, GD Hospital, and he's also the President of Endocrine Society of Bengal. I would also like to invite Dr. Sanjoy Sheel. He's a general renowned surgeon specializing in laparoscopic and bariatric surgery attached to Woodland Hospital and has a vast experience of 32 years. Dr. Sanjay Sheel is probably not present with us. Dr. Shubhadeep Pramanik, consultant endocrinologist with special interest in diabetes, thyroid and other hormonal disorders, and he's attached to Neotia Getwell Multi-Speciality Hospital. Unfortunately, both the chairpersons are not with us right now. They might be joining us shortly. I would like to request sir to introduce ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. Coming to the new chapter of medicine now, endocrinology and thyroid disorder. Thyroid, you know, hypothyroid and thyroid disorder is very common in the general population. At least 12 to 20% patients suffering from the thyroid disorder, and 3 to 8% suffering from the subclinical hypothyroid. And this subclinical hypothyroid means thyroid level is normal. T3 peripheral thyroid hormone is normal, T3, T4, but TSH, that is pituitary hormone, is elevated. And sometimes these subclinical hypothyroid hamper the general well-being and practically some lethargy, weakness, some cognition defect, some cardiovascular abnormalities develops and potentiated with this hypoclinical thyroid disorder. And sometimes it's very difficult to treat. Which person to treat, how to treat, this is very important. And Selina will describe all these things. Over to Selina.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. A very good afternoon, everyone. At the very outset, I would like to thank the organizing committee of Howrah Town Diabetic Society for inviting me here. I have been entrusted to speak on unmasking the subclinical hypothyroidism need of the hour. So, before we dwell into the complexities of subclinical hypothyroidism, whether to treat or not, let's just take a brief look at the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. So in endocrinology, as we all know, everything runs around a feedback system. So we can see here that the hypothalamus is there, which is going to secrete the thyroid releasing hormone that is going to stimulate the pituitary to cause a release of thyroid stimulating hormone that in turn is going to stimulate the thyroid gland to produce T4 and T3. Now these circulating thyroid hormones are in turn going to go and cause a feedback inhibition in the pituitary and the hypothalamus. Everything is set in such a way so as to maintain equilibrium. If there is an error or malfunction anywhere at this point in this axis, then that would lead to a spectrum of thyroid disorders having hyperthyroidism at one end and hypothyroidism at the other. So like we can see, I think the pointer is not working. So as we can see here, there is overt hypothyroid at one end where the thyroxine levels are low and TSH is high, and overt hyperthyroidism is at the other end where the T4, T3 is high and the TSH is low, and in between we have the subclinical ones. So definition. Now what is hypothyroidism? It is a condition where the thyroid gland is not being able to function adequately, so the thyroid hormone levels are low and the TSH is high. This requires treatment. What is subclinical hypothyroidism? Subclinical hypothyroidism, this is a milder form of hypothyroidism where the TSH levels are high despite the free T4 levels being in the normal range. Now I have kept this slide. It is visible in the dotted lines. I think the pointer is not working, never mind. So in the dotted lines we can see the range of the T4 and the TSH. So in clear-cut overt hypothyroidism, the T4 is less and the TSH is high, whereas in subclinical hypothyroidism, the T4 is normal but the TSH is high. Now, the term subclinical hypothyroidism was introduced early in the 1970s, around the time in which the TSH assays and the measurements came into existence. And for all practical purposes, subclinical hypothyroidism is a biochemical diagnosis where the T4 is within the population defined normal range, but the TSH levels are higher. So I have particularly kept this illustration to highlight two facts. First of all, the relation between the FT4 and the TSH is a logarithmic one, which means that with a small degree in reduction of the FT4 levels, there is a relatively larger increase in the TSH levels. And also, this is what gives us an idea why some patients with a normal or a high TSH are going to have normal FT4 levels and some patients would be having a lesser free T4 levels. Now coming to the next point, that is the variation. So the T4 and the TSH undergo a substantial inter-individual variability. So for some instances, for some patients, a specific range would be there. For another patient, the range would be slightly higher or lower. So this is basically the hypothalamic set point, which is affected by various parameters like environment, obesity, and many other factors. So while assessing a patient of hypothyroidism, we must look at the ranges also so that these individual variations can be taken into consideration. Coming to the epidemiology, so data varies. The prevalence can be anywhere between 3 to 8%. Some studies show data of 8 to 15%, like Sir was mentioning. And the prevalence increases with increasing in age. It is more common in women and in iodine deficient areas. Now coming to the distribution of the TSH levels as far as subclinical hypothyroidism is concerned, 75% of the patients have a TSH within the range of 4.5 to 6.9. 20% have about in the range of 7 to 9.9 and only 5% have it greater than 10. So I've just kept a slide to highlight the reference range. Free T4, the reference range for all practical purposes is 0.86 to 1.94 nanogram per dl. Total T4 reference range is 5 to 11 microgram per dl. The units are also important. And TSH, also known as thyrotropin, the reference range is 0.45 to 4.5. Now coming to the causes of subclinical hypothyroidism. So all the causes which are responsible for causing overt hypothyroidism are the same ones which can cause subclinical hypothyroidism. For instance, chronic autoimmune thyroiditis or Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is a very common entity, and we get high titers of anti-TPO antibody. Secondly is the radioiodine or the surgical management of the Graves' thyrotoxicosis. After that, the TSH levels may be persistently high with normal FT4 levels. And inadequate thyroid hormone replacement in cases of overt hypothyroidism, some drug therapy like lithium, iodine, etc. Now there are some situations where the serum TSH levels are elevated, but not exactly they can be placed in the definition of subclinical hypothyroidism. So we can loosely say that these are actually the differential diagnosis of subclinical hypothyroidism. So firstly, non-thyroidal illness or the sick euthyroid syndrome as we call it. This is a syndrome which it can also happen in situations when patients are fasting for a prolonged time. What happens is that the enzymes, deiodinases, they stop working in the right way. So the conversion of T4 to T3 is not possible. That leads to a reduction in T3 levels and an increase in the reverse T3 levels. Now when the disease is progressing or the non-thyroidal illness is taking shape, that is not the time we confuse it with subclinical hypothyroidism. Rather, it is the recovery from the non-thyroidal illness at a time in which the TSH levels have started rising, but the T4 is normalized. So this is a situation where we can get biochemical parameters similar to that of subclinical hypothyroidism, but we need to keep in mind that it is the context. If a patient is admitted in the ICU or if the patient is recovering from some illness, then in that background we need to repeat it one more time before stamping it as subclinical hypothyroidism. Second is the pulsatile TSH secretion. So TSH secretion has got variability. It is usually higher towards the end of the day and nadir in the afternoon, so that may again cause confusion. assay variability. Now, mostly the high sensitive immunometric assays are used to determine the targets for TSH as well as determine the levels of TSH. So, what really happens is they use two types of antibodies. One is the capture antibody and one is the signal antibody. Both of this bind to the TSH, and once signal is emitted, that is going to give an idea of the amount of TSH concentration. So what happens is sometimes these assays might not be exactly up to the mark. They may vary from lab to lab. That is where what happens, a particular TSH might be in the normal range for a patient, but the moment you repeat it in another lab, it might come high. So these things need to be kept in mind. Another is heterophile antibodies. So these antibodies, they might cause interferences leading to a higher signal and false interpretation of high TSH. This is the reason why whenever we face a patient of subclinical hypothyroidism biochemically, we need to go for a repeat of the same thing 2 to 3 months later. Now, last but not least, TSH secreting pituitary adenomas and thyroid hormone resistance syndrome. So, thyroid hormone resistance can be both the thyroid hormone receptor alpha and beta, and they have a varied presentation. They can present with either goiter, deafness, there can be palpitations, features, mixed features of both hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. But many a times they have a high TSH in a background of normal thyroid hormones. And some patients with severe obesity. So what happens in obesity? In obesity, the levels of leptin rise, and leptin causes a stimulation to the TSH, so TSH might falsely rise. So once the patient is asked to lose weight, in many instances the TSH might go back to normal. So whenever we face a patient with obesity or very high body weight and the TSH say is slightly on the higher side, say about 8 or 9, and the patient wants to know, we might as well advise the patient that why not try to lose your weight and then repeat the TSH to see what lies ahead. So now coming to the clinical features. Majority of the patients of subclinical hypothyroidism are asymptomatic. Now, if at all they present with symptoms, the symptoms are the same as that of overt hypothyroidism, but they are milder and they are variable depending upon the degree of elevation of TSH and the duration. In elderly, the symptoms are fewer. This is probably explained because in many studies they have shown that the upper normal range of the target of TSH in elderly is a bit higher. So what happens is we accumulate more and more people with a higher TSH in the subclinical hypothyroidism definition group, but they do not have much of symptoms. So fatigue, muscle weakness, weight gain, cold intolerance, constipation, etc., depression, everything is there. So I'll be going through the next few slides where we have some amount of data, so that might be a little boring, but we'll just briefly, I'll try to highlight. So cardiovascular risk, what do the thyroid hormones do? Basically, they have a positive ionotropic property and chronotropic property. That is why they cause cardiac output, increase in the cardiac output and the functioning of the heart. But whenever there is a reduction in the T43 levels, that would lead to bradycardia as well as reduction in cardiac output. Also, the T3 hormone is necessary for the vasodilation, which it causes via the nitric oxide. If the T4 levels are there, resistance rises, so the blood pressure also increases. Now, what really has been shown in studies is that, now there are a lot of conflicting data. So Rodondi et al., they had done a prospective study where they had showed that the TSH levels between 10 and 19 were associated with an increased risk of cardiac disease. But Chewelsky et al. Had shown that in individuals who are at a higher age, greater than 85, actually a higher TSH was beneficial for them. And Edris et al. Had shown that increase in level of LDL, cholesterol, blood pressure, etc. was associated with subclinical hypothyroidism. So all these studies with mixed evidence needs to be kept in mind while managing a patient. Coming to functional capacity, there is decreased muscle strength and exercising capacity. Mentini et al. Had shown that after treatment of patients of subclinical hypothyroidism, after 6 months, there was an increase in exercise performance and it was beneficial in that group. Cognitive impairment. So thyroid hormone deficiency is associated with cognitive decline. Why? Because thyroid hormones are necessary for neuronal growth, migration and myelination. Here again we have conflicting data. Pasqualetti et al. In their study showed that there was an increased cognitive decline in patients who were subclinical hypothyroid, but Akintola et al. They found that there was no increase in risk. Mood disturbance, here again some studies have shown that there is an increase in depression, whereas some studies have shown that it is not. Renal functions. So coming to renal functions, the prevalence of subclinical hypothyroidism in patients with chronic kidney disease was found to be around 18%, and in some studies they showed that the decline in GFR was actually corrected after replacement with levothyroxine therapy. Reproductive abnormalities, there is evidence of increased risk of miscarriages in women with subclinical hypothyroidism. And last but not least, prevalence of MAFLD, that is the new nomenclature for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, correlated with the serum TSH levels. 30% of patients of subclinical hypothyroidism had the typical USG findings of NFLD versus 20% of control. So now coming to the management. So whenever the question of management of subclinical hypothyroidism comes up, it sparks up a considerable debate whether to treat or whether not to treat. And if at all to treat, when to initiate the treatment, and at all to treat, as Sir was mentioning at that time. Another important factor is whenever we are treating the elderly, it becomes a challenge. So the factors which needs to be considered while deciding on levothyroxine therapy are the age of the patient. We have to be careful in the elderly. In the younger patients, we can go for a more zealous control. Extent of the elevation of TSH, whether it's gradually increasing or it's very high or it's maintaining a level. Associated cardiovascular risk factors, anti-TPO antibodies, and clinical symptoms of hypothyroidism. So the first strategy is wait and watch. If a patient comes to us for the first time, raised TSH, normal T4 levels, we need to wait and watch. Repeating the TSH after 2 to 3 months would be a wise suggestion to confirm the elevation of TSH before starting treatment. Why should we need to repeat after 2 to 3 months? We might as well start it off, because half of the patients with mild thyroid dysfunction or subclinical hypothyroidism, they have shown to revert back to the normal thyroid function in 1 to 2 years. About 25% progress to overt hypothyroidism. So what are the factors which are going to increase the chances of progression from subclinical to overt? Would be presence of anti-TPO antibodies, higher level of TSH at the presentation, and younger patients. And if there is an increase in cardiovascular risk, then also we need to keep it in mind. Now coming to the treatment. So both the American Thyroid Association as well as the American Association of Clinical Endocrinology recommend levothyroxine therapy in these scenarios. That is, number 1, TSH greater than 10. Number 2, presence of anti-TPO antibodies. Number 3, if the patient is having hypothyroid symptoms or a big goiter. And lastly, women of reproductive age. Now coming to patients who are already pregnant, there again we have to be very careful. Even if the TSH is on the lower sides, we have a different set of guidelines. Explaining that would take almost another lecture, so it would not be possible today. Now what about the dose? So patients with subclinical hypothyroidism do not need a full dose of levothyroxine replacement. The usual dose of replacement for overt hypothyroidism is 1.6 to 1.8 microgram per kg. That would result to tunes of about 75 to 125 microgram per day. But in patients with subclinical hypothyroidism, usually it starts at a lower dose, starting from around 25 microgram to 75 microgram. Also in patients who are on the elderly side and chances of cardiovascular disease or arrhythmias are there, we can always start with a lower dose of say about 25 microgram to look for tolerance. So this is a very clumsy slide. I'll just summarize as the pointer is not working. So first time patient is coming to us with high TSH, normal T4, we go for a repeat. After repeat, if we find that the TSH is greater than 10 or the TSH is less than 10, we can decide accordingly. TSH greater than 10, if the patient is an elderly patient, then we might as well see if there are no symptoms, and we might as well wait. If it is a younger patient, then we can run in an anti-TPO antibody or we can start the treatment. Now coming to the side where the TSH second time was less than 10. So less than 10 can again be divided into say from 4 to 7, 7 to 10. 4 to 7 we need not do anything. We can just work it up later and wait for another 3 to 6 months. 7 to 10 we need to look for anti-TPO antibody, or if the patient is having symptoms, a goiter or features, we can give a trial of levothyroxine therapy. So to summarize, subclinical hypothyroidism has an elevated TSH with normal T4. While most patients are asymptomatic, some may have symptoms of hypothyroidism. It needs to be differentiated from other disorders which might cause transient elevation of TSH, like renal failure, non-thyroidal illness, age, medications, and most importantly, assay interference. It has got potential correlation with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and decreased functional capacity. Treatment should be commenced if the level of TSH is greater than 10, anti-TPO positivity, symptomatic, and if the patient is in a pregnant state with a range greater than 2.5. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Serena, for your baby deliberation. Just I want to tell you, please highlight something about the subclinical thyroid and pregnancy. This is very important and practical question.
Pardon, sir? Subclinical hypothyroidism?
And pregnancy.
Pregnancy, yes.
This is very important.
So, in pregnancy, actually we can divide it into few parts. Say if the patient is having TSH greater than 10. So, then there is no question of thinking everything, we directly treat. If the TSH is less than 2.5, then no treatment is needed. Now comes the picture between 2.5 to 10, what is to be done. So, this has to be divided into two groups. One group is 2.5 to 4, 4.5, or the upper limit of normal of the population derived range, and 4.5 to 10. So, we are having two divisions. Now, whenever it is between the upper limit of normal to 10, here we run in an anti-TPO antibody. If anti-TPO antibody is positive, then you must treat. That is what the guidelines recommend. If the anti-TPO is negative, then it is good to treat. But in our country, such a scenario, what happens is the patients don't come to follow up. So, we usually recommend that if it is between upper limit of normal and in between 10, even if the anti-TPO is negative, we go for treatment. Now comes in between 2 to 2.5 to 4. Here what do we do? If the anti-TPO is negative, we need not treat. If the anti-TPO is positive, then for the benefit of doubt, we can treat or we might as well follow up.
Exactly. If the anti-TPO is positive, despite of TSH 3.5 to 4, we'll have to start it. Okay, any question from the floor?
So common treatment, which is you said that in infertility cases and all, the gynecologists already start the L-thyroxine supplementation at a very low threshold.
Yes.
So why is it that there is no consensus between the gynecological society and the endocrine society to come upon a guideline?
On a consensus. Yeah. We don't really have any such consensus. We only have some studies to back us up where they have shown that if there is a subfertility or infertility and the TSH is in a subclinical hypothyroid zone, we might as well give a trial of treatment, but we do not have any hard-based guidelines or recommendations on that as of now.
Any gynecologist has a threshold of 2.5 and anything above that, yes, they start giving L-thyroxine supplementation.
No, if antibody negative, in case of 2.5, yes, we should not start.
It should not start, but that is the thing which we commonly see in our clinical practice.
Any other question?
Actually, many a time we come across patients who have already been started on thyroxine, like he told, not pregnancy or gynae thing. Any other patient with a subclinical hypothyroidism, as you stated, should not start, wait and watch, and all those criteria. What will you do practically if the patient comes to you? Whether you stop it, repeat after 3 months, what is the standard protocol?
So, madam, we don't really have any defined protocol, but what we usually do is we can ask for the initial TSH, that what point of time it was started. So, if the TSH was on a higher side, we might as well continue with the same dose and ask for a repetition. But if we do not get any data and the dose of thyroxine is very low, say for instance, sometimes we see prescriptions with 12.5, 12.5 absolutely has no value, that we can stop confidently. Even 25, if the patient seems to be normal, the cycles are normal, doesn't have any associated features of hypothyroidism, even we can try to stop. But if the patient is getting a higher dose, say 75 or 50, and with that the TSH is normal, maybe we can continue and ask for an anti-TPO antibody and keep under follow-up every 6 months.
Yeah, I was asking about any consensus guidelines because I don't.
No, we don't have any consensus.
It's your practical.
No, this is just,
do,
yes,
right?
yes. We don't have any consensus as of now. Sir, I think we don't have any consensus on this.
No.
We are glad to listen from you a lot. My question is, where lies the difference between myxedema and hypothyroidism? And what is myxedema madness?
So, myxedema is actually even more exaggerated form of hypothyroidism. That is where the absolute function of the thyroid levels go down, the T4 levels are almost negligible. And at that point of time, it is not just the features of hypothyroidism. Beyond that, we also get electrolyte imbalances. The patient would be having a severe degree of cold, hypothermia, etc. That would require ICU admission, management, hypotension, hyponatremia, electrolyte abnormalities, and it is usually precipitated if the patient is not on levothyroxine for a very long time, and sometimes in cold or if there is an associated infection or myocardial infarction, that might precipitate.
It is extremely rare now. Myxedema is extremely rare now. I have not seen it.
Yes, madam. Yes, here. Elderly with cognitive decline with subclinical hypothyroidism, do they need treatment? Or should we initiate?
So, like we have just discussed, it is better not to initiate in subclinical hypothyroidism, that is as long as the TSH is less than 10, but we need to keep them under follow-up because there is definitely a possibility that the TSH would rise. Possibility is there, then we can initiate, otherwise we would miss because 25% of the cases of subclinical hypothyroidism would progress to hypothyroidism. I think that is the only thing we can keep in mind.
And when can we stop replacement in subclinical hypothyroidism?
Stopping replacement, for instance, if the patient was pregnant and post-pregnancy on our follow-up we see that things is normalizing, we are giving a trial, the TSH level is normal, that is when we can stop. Secondly, if it was a transient phase of TSH high, which happens in some cases, that we need to do trial and error. There is no such definite guidelines or definition as when to stop.
And in case of infertility, when the patient gets pregnant, should we...
If the patient is already on the drug, we usually continue.
Yes. And should we follow them up as per the pregnancy protocol of...
Yes, we should
T4
always
and
follow
TSH?
them as per the pregnancy targets, I should rather say. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Serena, and let us close the session.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Speaker ma'am. Ma'am, kindly wait. We would like to invite Dr. Dasharathi Sarkar to felicitate Dr. Tarinia. Ma'am, kindly join us on stage for the felicitation. Thank you. I would like to invite Dr. Guru Prasad Bhattacharya to felicitate Dr. Dasharathi Sarkar. And we all have a round of applause. Thank you, Speaker ma'am. Thank you, Chairperson.